Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar entitled Navigating the Latest Citrix Platform Updates. I'm one of your hosts, Bill Sutton with XenTegra. I'll introduce the other hosts in a few minutes. Our webinar today, excuse me, will include the following items on the agenda. First, we'll do a round of introductions of the panelists. Excuse me. Then we'll talk a little bit about XenTegra. I'm going to cover most of that. Then we'll talk about the latest platform updates that Citrix has come out with back earlier this year. We'll talk about that as well as some updates. We'll talk about preparing for deployment of the CVAD 2402 LTSR, what that means and how you can get there. And then, of course, throughout the webinar, I would encourage you to put questions either in the chat box or the question and answer box, and one of our panelists will answer or will answer live. So, meet the panelists. Again, my name is Bill Sutton. I'm one of your hosts. I'm the director of modern workspace at XenTegra. So I manage everything end user computing related, including obviously Citrix. Also on the webinar with me is Geremy Meyers. He's the ATS director of the US East and Canada for the Citrix business unit of Cloud Software Group. I will hand it to you, Geremy, and let you further introduce yourself and introduce the other members of your team that are here with us.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Bill. So like Bill said, I manage a group of ATSs on the East Coast in Canada. So if you've been around Citrix for a long time, you know we've always had pre-sales engineers, and we've actually redefined what that role looks like over the past year and a half or so to be what we call technical strategists. So we'll get into that here in just a little bit because that's redefined a little what our role is and really what our goals are with our customers. But I do have two folks from my team on the call as well. So I've got Megan Desmond and Adam Vang, and they are going to be in the background answering questions. So if anything pops up, doesn't matter how hairy it gets, I feel 100% confident they'll handle it. Or they'll bring it up and we'll all chat through it. But either way, if you've got questions, please put them in the chat. I don't know if I could introduce any better, Bill, so I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. We'll jump right in then. So first off, for those of you who may not know, if you do, you'll just have to stick through this. Who is XenTegra? So XenTegra is a company founded 12 years ago by a gentleman named Andy Whiteside, who was with Citrix, and he left to form a partner that behaved a little bit different than the partners he had dealt with in the past. XenTegra LLC, which is the mothership, which is the organization I'm a part of, is the main company or the original company. We have since expanded, as you can see on the right in this slide. We have what we refer to typically as our nearshore subsidiary, and that's XenTegra Canada. So that obviously is headquartered in outside of Toronto in Canada. They run the business in Canada for the Canadian market, but also can provide nearshore resources to us as needed, to XenTegra LLC or to our other subsidiaries as needed or required. Second, we have XenTegra India, that is the offshore business. Again, they are in country in India, on the ground selling and implementing solutions for customers. But then again, they can also be leveraged for if offshore resources are needed by our customers. Third, there in the middle is XenTegra Gov. That has actually been rebranded now. It's actually now known as FlexKey. That's FLEXKEY, but that's our SLED Fed business that is owned in part by XenTegra. Next is XenTegra One, which is headquartered out west, but is our small and medium business organization that manages both implementations as well as managed services for the small business segment. And then lastly is our MSP, or managed service provider, on the LLC side that handles managed services and hosting for our customers in the US. So about us a little bit, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we are a value-added reseller. So we can sell licensing and product and services and so forth, and manage your relationships with your vendors. We hold a number of partnerships, some of which are listed at the bottom there. We offer strategic consulting services. For 5 years, I was the consulting director at XenTegra, so I was intimately involved in all of our consulting services across our business lines. Those strategic consulting services follow our 4 practices at XenTegra. The practices include the modern workspace practice, which is the one that I lead, We also have a modern apps practice, which involves technology around ServiceNow and Salesforce, and that includes obviously license sales as well as services for all of these items. Networking and security is the next business unit that we have, and then last is modern data center. Again, things like Nutanix and so forth that they handle. As I mentioned earlier, we also have managed services and can provide support and management for customer environments, including 24/7 help desk, full-on managed services, and hosting as well. And then one of the things that we do frequently is these complementary assessments, which I'll talk about in a few minutes in a little bit more detail. But essentially, these are free 4-hour assessments that we'll do for customers or prospects to help uncover issues that may be happening in their environment and provide recommendations for remediation. One key thing I want to double click on this slide is in the bottom right hand corner. Our founder and CEO, one of the things that he wanted to do when he created XenTegra was build a community and serve that community. So that involves obviously doing things like this. So all of you who are on this call are part of the XenTegra community, and our goal here is to educate you and help serve the community. And again, this is another key mission of Andy's, which is to enable customers through a true partnership, and we do that through a number of ways, including those assessments, but also things like this, educational webinars that we do frequently, hands-on workshops. We do a podcast. Geremy and I and Andy and a couple of others do a Citrix session, a podcast called the Citrix Session. Every Monday morning, well, just about every Monday morning, we record the podcast and then it gets posted. You can find it on your delivery method of choice. Again, it's called the Citrix Session. And then lastly, one of the things that we do as part of enabling the community is we frequently offer heavily discounted conference passes. If you go to XenTegra.com/conference, you can apply for passes to upcoming tech conferences. I will tell you that Microsoft Ignite, which is next month, is sold out. Doesn't mean we can't get you a pass. If you're interested in going, you can register. We'll let you know.
Hey, Bill, real quick. So the
Yeah.
podcast that we do on a weekly basis, usually the format is us going out to the Citrix website. We go to the blogs, we pick a blog post, and we kind of run with it. And we talk through it, discuss it, and usually, if I'm being honest, our attention spans go in multiple different directions, right? Because we've been doing this for so long. I'd love to hear, just kind of open it up to feedback in the future to have folks say, hey, listen, I'd love for you to cover this topic as well, because a lot of our planning, we're trying to get a feel for what the most relevant things are. At the same time, I think some of the folks who come to me after the podcast and said, I really wish you'd cover XYZ. So I would love that feedback too, actually. Yeah,
I would as well. That'd be great feedback. Yeah, like Geremy said, it's very informal. We don't edit it. It's largely unscripted. It's 100% unscripted, really. We just follow the form of the blog post that we're going over, but not to mean we can't change it up a little bit going forward. So we'd love to hear feedback. Thanks, Geremy. Okay, navigating the latest Citrix platform updates. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Geremy to take us through these slides and talk about this content.
All right, Bill. So listen, a lot has changed at Citrix over the last maybe, what did you say, Bill? Maybe 18 months?
Yeah.
Much of it from a technology perspective I'm not going to say it hasn't changed. We'll actually touch on that here in a minute, because there's actually a pace of change to the technology that's pretty exciting. But, when I go into meetings with customers, a lot of times there's a question around, listen, what the heck happened with Citrix, from an organization perspective? So I like to cover that just so everyone understands. I think initially, for the longest time, Citrix has been a public company, and I forget which year we went public, but it was, we'll just argue, many moons ago. And last year, maybe the year before, I want to say maybe October 2022, we went private is what happened. And so we were a combination, a merger, if you will, of Citrix, the organization, which included things like ShareFile, NetScaler, XenServer, a lot of those bits and pieces, as well as TIBCO, right? So, a lot of the names you see on the screen, if you're a longtime Citrix customer, you're probably not familiar with TIBCO, Jasper, SoftSpot, those sorts of things. But, we all merged under what we've called the cloud software group, right? And so each of the entities you see on the right are all business units of cloud software group. So, the way that works, because I am not I don't know much about how organizations tend to align themselves, but, Bill, maybe the best way to think about this is, Alphabet, right? Like no one remembers the name Alphabet, except for that's the
Right.
parent company of Google, right? So you can kind of think of us the same way. Citrix is still Citrix. The way we're organized is a lot of our leadership in the BU is, organized like Citrix, right? ShareFile is completely different. Bill will tell you that for the longest time, ShareFile's always sort of functioned a little bit differently, a little bit separately. I think where the BUs differ are the NetScaler and XenServer. I'm not going to touch on the TIBCO ones, and if I'm being completely transparent, they're not ones that I typically interact with, right? So that's a separate sales team and kind of fits that motion. But XenServer is its own BU. NetScaler is both its own BU and it's a part of Citrix now. So earlier this year, we actually combined those two. And that's really important when it comes to things like licensing, which we'll hit on in just a little bit. But the NetScaler BU that you see off the right is actually more of an e-commerce BU. So that is a part of the business that is solely focused on customers that are front-ending a lot of their e-commerce websites, and there are quite a bit. So I know many of us are probably using NetScaler to front-end a Citrix environment, but NetScaler from a platform scales incredibly well. And it's actually front-ending a lot of websites that I don't think I'm allowed to mention here on the webinar. But if you didn't know it, I think there's an obnoxious stat around how much and how often folks will traverse a NetScaler to surfing the web. But anyways, we're talking about the Citrix BU, and know that a lot of NetScaler entitlements and Citrix entitlements have come together as a part of this. So,
Right.
but we'll keep talking through it. So let's keep going, Bill.
Okay.
So last year, when we made sort of the integration of the two companies, the two or three companies, not much changed from a platform perspective, from a product perspective. We were really sort of realigning the business. This year, and I guess we can almost say, because this is 2024 promises to be, 2024 has sort of fulfilled the promise to be more simplified from a product offering perspective, meaning we used to have lots and lots of SKUs, different various flavors of XenApp and XenDesktop and DAS. So some of us are probably advanced customers, some of us are premium. There's premium plus, there's add-ons for this, there's add-ons for that. The idea was, we wanted to simplify a lot of that product packaging. Some of it for us, I'll be completely transparent. It makes things a lot simpler operationally for us to have less SKUs and less products to have to work with. But honestly, it's made it a lot easier for customers as well. Like, listen, we want you to just buy what we call the UHMC platform and not have to worry about if you're not, if you're getting the features or not getting the features that were in a different edition before. So we had customers saying, hey, listen, I am an advanced customer. What happened to the feature XYZ? Well, like, you have to have premium to get that, right? So the idea was, let's simplify this. And then secondly, let's get out of the business of add-on SKUs, right? So for instance, maybe you bought CVAD in the past or DAS, and then you wanted to buy, let's just say, a NetScaler to go along with that. And oh, by the way, you also happen to be an endpoint management customer, or you were considering some sort of endpoint management strategy. The idea was we didn't want to have a la cartes either, right? So the idea is, let's simplify this. So what you'll find is we have less SKUs. And secondly, you'll find that there's a lot in them. So let's hit the next one and we'll kind of start rolling through what that looks like. So thing number one, we wanted to get away, and this is why the name of the pre-sales engineer has changed, right? Because we're more focused on a strategy as you as a customer. Secondly, we wanted to focus less on products, right? So I think about how my pre-sales team was organized before. You as a customer might have had a platform, but then we would come to you later and say, oh, by the way, Bill, I know you own CVAD, but I also think you need XYZ. So we'd come sell you something else. We wanted to get away from that because we really wanted to focus on a longer term relationship. So, either A, we're working directly with you as a customer and we're providing some value in making sure that you're getting the adoption, the consumption, the expansion, the usage out of the product. And to be quite frank, you just know what's in the product. So one of my favorite things to do as an SE in the past was go, hey, listen, you own CVAD, right? But did you know you get WIM with that? Did you know you get app layering with that? So when I'm moving from, lots of customers, it's really tough for me to do that, right? Because I couldn't invest the time. That's what we're doing now. We're really investing the time in the relationships. We're investing the time in the partnerships as well. So I spend a lot of time working with Bill, making sure he understands how this works and how I can support him in his accounts as well. Because we're less about being transactional and honestly more about that partnership. So again, we're simplifying and we're consolidating a lot of the products we sell. We are reinventing what those relationships look like with both our customers and our partners. And the big question that comes up quite a bit is, is Citrix as a technology platform, is it stagnating? What I would tell you is I have not seen as much, and maybe this is just the new structure of the business. I have not seen as much in its fast-paced change and evolution in the product as I have seen over the last 18 months. Whether
I
that
would agree with
is
that. Agree with that
RFPs,
100%. Yeah.
yeah, so customers come to us and we're asking customers, listen, what do you want to see in the product? Listen, do you want to see NetScaler come with polka dots? We'll submit an RFE and work with the product teams on how we can roll out a new version of NetScaler. If you need the product to be able to support a new authentication protocol, again, that's where we're investing our time to make sure it works. And lastly, man, how do we automate a lot of this? So that is another key thing as well. With everything being cloud-based, you'll find us innovating and investing time, across the board. So let's hit the next one, Bill. So listen, what we do has changed tremendously over time. So, Bill, what was the first iForum that you went to? If we go back in time.
Well, the first thing I went to was a solution summit, and then the iForum, I guess the next year, that would have been probably 1999, maybe 2000.
So our first customer conference, iForum, probably at the Swan and Dolphin because we were huge fans of Disney. That's just kind of how we work. But that was very much a focus on end user compute. In fact, that has evolved over the years. A lot of it is driven by the actual endpoint devices themselves. Some of it's been driven by, simply the idea that we need to start running workloads in other people's infrastructure, namely the cloud, right? But eventually, this turned into networking as well. So, we acquired a company, back in the early 2000s, which was NetScaler. And we took that product from a native load balancer that was front-ending lots of websites then into what became NetScaler, NetScaler Gateway, remote access solution, VPN. And honestly, that was sort of the natural evolution into sort of a zero trust model as well. So I know that that is a big buzzword these days, but for a lot of our customers, they've been zero trust for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And so it started out with just smart access on a VPN. How can I posture your device before I let you in? It wasn't a full-on VPN, a little endpoint analysis, to the point now where we have something called secure private access with a protected enterprise browser, which, again, you think about how a VPN works, initially it is, I'm going to open up a big tunnel to your data center, and you have sort of implicit full access to, listen, we'll give you access, but everything is implicitly turned off. And you've got to turn pieces on. And it's not a device you manage anymore, it's a service. Not just that, but what you're accessing from is a managed browser that sits on your endpoint as opposed to a hosted application that sits in a data center. So I think the lines are blurring around what endpoint and networking and zero trust is. But just it's a lot of the same story that we've been delivering for years with a lot of our customers. Yeah. So I like to point out something because I still get this question quite often. I'd argue that a lot of my enterprise customers have made a transition to our Citrix DaaS platform. But we have a lot of folks who are a little bit nervous, right? They want to know just how widely deployed this is, before they make the move over to the cloud. And what I'll tell you is we have invested heavily in a majority of our conversations with customers around leveraging our DaaS platform. So what that means is a managed control plane that's DDCs and storefronts and SQL and those pieces sitting in a cloud, hosted and delivered by us, and it's completely transparent to you. So if you've ever been through a Citrix upgrade and you've ever lost the SQL password service account, or you've ever had to fall back into a middle of an upgrade, a lot of those challenges, they kind of go away, right? And the growth has accelerated over the last two years, honestly, almost 50% over the last 12 months. But the idea is when I look at support tickets coming in, they're no longer a lot of those normal issues that folks bump into, Bill. A lot of issues that your team has to pick up and run with. On the flip side, it's allowed us to accelerate the features that we roll out as well. So for instance, in the past, a lot of customers, and we'll talk about this later in the webinar, is, they're on an LTSR version. So what that is, it's a long-term service release that's got the features that are sort of baked into the product, a year and a half ago, 6 months ago, whenever that last long-term service release was released. And their upgrade path is to the next LTSR, which only comes out once every 18 months, maybe 2 years, depending on kind of what your risk preference is. The idea is, listen, I want to be on a stable platform. I don't want it to change. And what I'm giving up is features. So, we have customers who are, by the way, if you're on 1912, that goes into life in 2 months. Just be aware, it's time. But we have 2 other LTSRs you can go to. The way this works in the cloud is the DAS plane is updated quite frequently. In fact, I want to say every 2 weeks. So it's easy to pick up and roll out features that might require a current release, which is typically a quarterly release, or a long-term service release. So for instance, there's a new version of the Teams that has just come out within the last 6 or 8 months, right? Those aren't features that come on the 2203 version of the code. It only comes on either your current release, a more modern release. So we just came out with 2402 as an LTSR. We'll talk about that. Or the DAS versions roll out all the time. So you might already have support for the new version of Teams and didn't even realize it. All right, let's keep moving, Bill.
Yep.
All right, so
Money slide, right?
I'm not going to read this. I can't read this. I'm getting older, and even if this was a little bit bigger, I still couldn't read it. But the idea is we're investing heavily in the platform. This is all features that have come out within the past, I'd argue 12 months. And so Citrix has not slowed down. So again, one of the questions that tends to come up is how much are we investing in the platform? I'd argue quite a bit. Everything from HDX updates to we've modernized the studio interface, so it's no longer an MMC, depending on what version you're running on, to Linux VDA support, Mac OS support from a VDA perspective, which is a pretty big deal. That just came out recently, to updates on the workspace side, to a standalone enterprise browser that supports just containerizing web and SaaS apps too. So listen, there's a lot going on at Citrix. I'd encourage you to reach out to your account team or reach out to your partner here at XenTegra to figure out what that looks like for you. So why did we make a lot of the changes that we're going to talk about here in a bit? It's, honestly, what's driving a lot of this is cost cutting, is customers are looking for ways to get more out of their budget spend. They're not necessarily increasing budget, but they're looking for ways to cost. And a big driver for that is how can we consolidate vendors? So this is a common ask. So Bill, when you have conversations with customers, how common are these conversations around how can I consolidate vendors? How can I save money? How can I do more with less? What does that typically look like in a lot of your customer conversations?
Yeah, we do obviously hear that, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide or so. But certainly cost cutting is one item. But to your point, we do frequently hear things like, we want to move to a single vendor for this function and 2 or 3 other functions. Is there a way we can do that? It simplifies things for the customer, makes the purchasing process and procurement process much simpler over time, and helps them reduce the likelihood of what we call shadow IT, where some big department has gone off and bought, some SaaS service that they thought they wanted, but didn't realize they may have already had in something else.
Absolutely. So a lot of what's driving our go-to-market changes has been, simply, how do we help a customer reduce spend? So let's hit the next one here.
Yep.
So that's where we've introduced 2 platforms. So the first one is called our Citrix Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud. The idea is we are including a lot of the features and a lot of the capabilities that you're leveraging today with the other areas of the business. So for instance, it includes, and this is a specific SKU, CVAT, right? So app virtualization, desktop virtualization, that's either on-prem. So if you've had a Citrix team for the last 5 years, you've probably heard us talk a lot about moving to the cloud. The idea is, we don't necessarily care. So it's whatever platform makes the most sense for your business. We get the license includes the ability to do this on-prem, so traditional CVAD, or do this in the cloud using the DAS control plane, or even better, a combination of both. So we do have customers who they have pockets of business that run just in different parts of the globe, and they have different needs, right? So the licensing includes the ability to do both. With the understanding that if you choose to use the cloud control plane, your workloads can actually sit on-prem in a data center. They can sit in any of the clouds, or more often than not, honestly, a combination of both. So when we talk about hybrid, and this is really what the hybrid multi-cloud means, it's, we're going to support whatever platform, whatever scenario you're looking for. And that even includes turnkey solutions as well. So we've added the ability to integrate in with things like Cloud PC, or I guess Microsoft Windows 365, or even, and this is more recently, Amazon Workspaces Core. So we've supported EC2 for a long time in AWS. Now we support Workspaces Core, but we do give you quite a bit of endpoint management licensing as well. So it's included inside. The capability is available to you, as well as probably more NetScaler, which is the enterprise ADC load balancing, than you need. The idea being you don't have to turn it all on, but the capacity is there if you choose to use it and would like to replace, multiple vendors within your environment, which we see quite frequently. Now, with that, that includes application security. So things like web app firewall. Again, the versioning here is all premium, whereas in the past, you might have had a NetScaler that included an advanced license. Everything is premium. So you get things like web app firewall. We do have customers retooling their applications to be more modern, meaning they're leveraging things like Kubernetes as a platform for these apps. Again, there is a containerized version of NetScaler as well, or just an application gateway, which is fantastic. So the idea being, with one license, you have the potential to replace things like F5, Horizon, AirWatch, Avi, Cisco in your platform. And not everything, but you can reduce that footprint from a vendor perspective down to a single license. So what's interesting is the story has not changed from a Citrix perspective. So there is any slide that we have had for years. In fact, it's almost a little bit tongue in cheek. We talk about any. And what we're really mentioning is we'd like to make sure you understand that, of course, any user, whether it's an internal user, external user, contractor, partner, that sort of thing, can connect from any device securely using either contextual access or managed endpoint access to any kind of application sitting on any cloud. The idea being, some of your applications are going to be running in a data center. Some applications are going to be running in a public cloud infrastructure of some kind that you still manage, or they could be a SaaS application. So maybe a platform as a service or some sort of SaaS offering that's being delivered to you, right? Could be local, could be external, but we see Citrix as a way to glue all those pieces together and make those available from a single UI. Here's a fun fact. So a lot of what my team uses, Bill, is an ATS. I'm not even sure if I've told you this, but there is a transformation in myself as a user, as Adam and Megan as users at Citrix, where for the longest time we had VDI, we had application virtualization. But if I'm being honest, most of the applications, much like everyone in the room here, most of our applications, they're SaaS-based, right? So I'm using Workday, I'm using Salesforce, I'm using some internal websites. And the application that I use to get to those is actually a managed browser, not a hosted Google Chrome instance or Edge or, I've actually, believe it or not, about 6 months ago, I saw IE, but it's not a hosted browser, but it is a local running containerized browser that accesses all of these pieces regardless of where they sit. So, I have to log in. I have to use Okta to log in. So that's the IDP that I'm using to do it. But once I'm in, I have all these applications. I don't know where they're running from or how they're secured, but I do it from a managed browser, which is interesting for someone who's had VDI for literally 15 years.
So if you go back 5 to 7 years, Geremy, what was the most common published application in the Citrix environment?
It was a browser.
It was a browser.
Still is for a lot of customers.
Yeah. And a lot of folks publish a browser to access on-prem web apps, of course. But a lot of folks, even still today, publish a web browser that runs from inside the data center, whether that data center is an on-premises data center or in a colo or in the cloud, to access a SaaS app. And that still works. It's still makes sense in most cases, in many cases, but it's not necessarily required anymore because of the advent of, like you were just saying, the concept of an enterprise browser where you can redirect the call for that to the local machine, use local power, but still get all the security and contextual awareness that you would get in a traditional published app environment.
I mean, I'll tell you where that makes sense is if you have used Salesforce at some point, they moved over to a new platform called Lightning.
Right.
Holy smokes, Lightning is a dog. Like it is a big consumer of resources. And if I'm publishing that from Chrome, from a server, I've got to plan my capacity accordingly.
Right.
On the flip side, Bill, I've got a brand new Mac M3 Pro Max, top of the line, the whole 9 yards. I'm just going down that path. And I run that local browser using the local resources. And of course it flies. So,
Right.
again, when we're looking at returns on investment for a lot of our, solutions, we're thinking about what does that capacity look like? What's the
Right.
endpoint you're connecting from? So anyways, let's keep moving.
Yep.
So just to sort of elaborate on that same concept, we're pretty open in terms of what we integrate with. The idea being bring your own blank, right? So for instance, from an end user perspective, bring your own client platform, whether it's Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, whether you've got, machines you don't manage where you're connecting from an HTML5 browser. I've got schools doing this. And any of the peripherals you might need to tap into. We've got direct integrations with a lot of the UC platforms. One of the most common use cases for Citrix is call centers. So we've got folks leveraging things like Teams. I see that quite a bit. We do see Avaya quite a bit. So a lot of call centers run on Avaya. RingCentral is a company that XenTegra partners with. And so there are plugins and optimizations for that. So it's not that you can just run these platforms inside of Citrix. There are integration points that actually optimize voice and video inside the platform. On the flip side, the delivery model. So if you've been around and you've heard us use the word FlexCast for years, it's just a fancy way of saying that it doesn't really matter what kind of desktop or application you're delivering, whether it's a server-based, quote unquote, RDSH desktop or application, or if it's dedicated VDI or pooled VDI, or even Linux. So we've got some oil and gas customers that all develop on Linux. Heck, we actually need to even update this so we can broker sessions. And I think the bottom one here is we can do something called remote PC into a physical endpoint, which by the way was huge during COVID, where we had lots of folks with desktops sitting in in an office somewhere, and users who would just broker into their physical endpoint in the office. We just extended that out to Mac OS as well. In fact, we've got a partnership with a company called Mac Stadium, which is pretty interesting. So I always wondered what a room full of Macs look like, and now I know. So I told Bill the other day, it looked like a tape library, but they've just got Macs lined up next to each other. But we have just about any OS supported, including your more popular versions of Linux. And from an infrastructure perspective, listen, a lot of customers are leveraging VMware today. Got it. XenServer, Nutanix, all supported. You can physically stream. Remember the days we were doing PVS to endpoints?
Oh yeah.
Again, I've still got a handful of customers doing that.
Yeah.
But also any of the popular clouds, Azure, Google, AWS, Oracle Cloud, all supported. And of course, how do you get there? HDX, ICA, if you're a long timer. I mean, in reality, that is the secret sauce. That is an optimized connection that glues the user back to the resource, unless it's a browser. It's a containerized browser, Bill, because we're doing that natively, right?
Yeah, it's just local.
It's just local. But again, we're leveraging, just about any sort of identity provider. So I see, of course, Active Directory, Azure AD. This is actually that's actually incorrect now. It's Intra ID, right? Okta, Dual. But of course, if you've got a standard-based SAML implementation, we support that as well. So again, the idea is you should be able to take anything that you're using, plug it into the solution, and we can make that work. And the goal of my team and the goal of XenTegra is to help walk you through what that might look like for you.
Yep.
So we've talked a little bit about this. So we'll skip this one, Bill, and just go to the next one and talk about what's included in the platform just for the sake of time. So let's go one more. So we really have two different SKUs, and I'm not joking when I say this because we don't have CVAD Advanced, CVAD Premium, Premium Plus, all the different versions. We just have either the hybrid multi-cloud, the Citrix Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud that we've talked about. And then we have the Citrix Platform license as well. And so this is going to be for probably your more larger organizations that need unlimited capacity. So think unlimited users, unlimited NetScaler capacity, access to the newer analytics and secure private access technologies we've been talking about. So again, newer use cases. But I'd argue, and if you roll to the next one, Bill, this is sort of the profile for our typical users. Number one, we've got most customers will fit into the Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud license SKU. So this gives you most of what you'll need. It includes as much capacity as you need. So we've got migration plans for most customers, regardless of what licensing you have today. There is a transition path into the Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud license that includes the capacity. So it's a consumption-based license, meaning the capacity's there. You're not being charged for the 1,000 instances of NetScaler that are included with it, but it's there if you need to go turn it on. You got a new use case, don't come to me, a sales guy, and ask me for more capacity. It's there, just go turn it on. That's the idea. We do have, and I sort of left this one out. So if you're a bit of a smaller customer, let's just say you have 100 licenses, let's be honest, you probably don't need to invest in either of the platforms. We'll continue to support you and just let you continue to use, CVAD in your footprint. And you'll get all the benefits of the evolution and the innovation that we're doing, but it's just more cost effective. And on the flip side, the Citrix Platform license is the all-in, all-you-can-eat license that would make sense, if you were growing or you needed some very specific features out of that platform. And here's what I'll tell you about how you get there. So we used to sell, Bill, these Kickstart SKUs, which were, all right, listen, if you're looking for analytics, if you're looking for secure private access, we've got sort of a pilot program where, we'll sell you a little bit of a consulting service, if you will, and help onboard that. We just end of sailed that, so it's no longer available. The idea being is if you're a customer and you're on Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud, and you see some features in the CPL license that you think make sense for you, just come to us and talk to us, and we'll figure out how to get you there.
Yep.
All right, so if we dive into individual features, we've hit on a few of these, right? So cloud managed, on-prem licensing, both included in Universal. Again, the Citrix for private cloud is 100% an on-prem solution. If you got a need for a cloud, you're going to need to look at the Universal license. Now, Bill, this is a bit of a change from when we first did this webinar 6 months ago, but at some point we actually pulled the XenServer entitlement out of the licensing stack, and we've since put it back in. So if you're a customer and you're running private cloud, Universal platform, if you're an existing customer and you've got an older version and you haven't made it to the newer platforms yet, that's okay too. You also get XenServer as well. In fact, we have a newer version that has come out literally within the last 4 or 5 months. Bear with me here. It was Hypervisor 8.2, and the replacement for that will be XenServer 8, right? So we did take what feels like a step back, but it is XenServer 8. You've got access to it. You can either reach out to your sales team or you can reach out to Bill and his team around how to get access to the new SKU. But as you upgrade, you'll get the automatic entitlement to that as well. Universal also gets, mobile device management. You get NetScaler capacity as well. So I think the capacity that comes with it is 1,000 instances of NetScaler, meaning a piece of hardware is an instance, a VPX is an instance, a CPX, a containerized instance of NetScaler is an instance. So a lot more capacity than you'll probably need, but you've got access to, and it's a terabyte of throughput as well. So 1,000 gigs of NetScaler throughput. So if you're a customer that's on, traditional NetScalers, so we just had a series of NetScalers go end of life recently, the 14Ks. If you're looking to replace that, especially if you're on pooled capacity, you would buy new hardware. By the way, the new hardware has it's lifetime RMA. So there's no longer a renewal on hardware. You buy the hardware once and you're done. And then you buy your Citrix Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud license. It includes any of the pooled capacity that you would need for that hardware. Or if you're thinking about deploying NetScaler in a cloud, you've got the capacity there as well. The only add for the platform license is if you need security and performance analytics, as well as sort of an integration with any of the SIMs like Splunk or Logarithm, those sorts of things. or if you need secure private access, which is that secure containerized browser access to web and SaaS apps that also provides you those same security controls that you used to get with a virtual app and desktop. All right, what's our next one, Bill?
You mentioned the hardware, right? Yeah, you did mention the hardware that the Universal Hybrid Multi-Cloud and the platform license include the license entitlements to NetScaler. If the customer needs hardware to run it on or wants to run it on hardware, that's available. They just apply the license through the NetScaler console to the hardware, just like you would with a virtual instance. So you're not limited to virtual by virtue of the entitlement, but you do have to buy the hardware at pretty much just at cost or a slight
Yeah,
uptick. It's pretty inexpensive from what we've seen.
it's very inexpensive. Yeah, I mean, listen, we're not trying to make money on hardware. I think what you'll notice is most companies are in the software business, and the hardware's there if you need it. So essentially, we sell the versions. Adam might keep me honest here. The versions that are still supported is we've got an 8900 series. So we're not selling that anymore, but it's still supported.
Right.
We've got a 5900 series that again is not, I think it's into sale, but it's still supported. But we do have the 9100s, the 1600s are our two hardware platforms. And again, you buy the hardware and the software just sits on top of it. So Adam, did I get that right?
Yep. The 9100s and the 5900s, and then the 16Ks is the larger boxes.
Perfect. Even a software guy can get that right. Even a software guy can get that right. Perfect. All right, let's do the next one, Bill.
Okay, so let me see. We'll that's really the meat of it in terms of talking about the platform. So I'll pause here if there's anybody again, and let everybody know if there's any questions, put them in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and we'll do the best we can to address them. Next, we're going to cover the deployment. Oh, there's a hand raise. Enter your question if you would, Mike, and can you enter it in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll get to it. Okay, no worries. Click by accident. No worries. All right, so next we're going to cover deployment of CVAD 2402 LTSR, which is the latest long-term service release. So the release strategy, which Geremy touched on a few minutes ago, early on in his presentation, there's really three release strategy or release cycles, if you will. There's the long-term service release on the left, the current release in the middle, and then the cloud service. So long-term service release, we commonly refer to as LTSR. These are designed for customers that cannot or don't wish to make a lot of platform changes very frequently. So it's really designed to provide support or have support for, I believe it's 5 years, 5 years right out of the gate, right, Geremy?
You're right. Five years of mainstream support is what we call it, but yes.
Right, mainstream support. And these come out every 2 to 3 years. They do come with a cumulative updates. So as bug fixes or security patches or what have you might be encountered, they will release what they call cumulative updates, and those are customers typically need to apply those reasonably quickly to their LTSR platform to make sure that it's up to date and continues to maintain support. From a current release, which is the more frequent releases, these are 2 to 4 releases per year. These really contain both the bug fixes that I mentioned in the CUs, but also new features. A lot of times, some of the newer features that a lot of folks are seeing now in 2402 have been out for a while. They were released in each one of the CRs along the way. We have some customers that adopt that because they want to stay on the bleeding or the cutting edge. Versus some customers, typically larger customers and those in regulated industries will stick with LTSR and just apply the CUs. But the downside, if you want to call it that, of the LTSRs, you're not going to get any of the new whiz-bang features that happen in those 5-year or those 2 to 3 year cycles. You're going to have to wait until the next LTSR comes out to get the advantage of those new features, but you will get all the bug fixes by virtue of the CUs. And then, like Geremy mentioned earlier, the cloud service, which is referred to now as DaaS, This is what they call evergreen. So it's updated every, I don't even know how frequent, every couple of weeks. I think there's
I
some,
think it's every couple of weeks. Yeah.
yeah, there's some updates made to that. Security patches are applied. So the only, and the cloud connectors, which is part and parcel of the cloud service, it's how the cloud service interacts with your cloud or the on-premises data center. Those are kept up to date by Citrix. They push the updates out on a recurring basis to make sure that that element of your infrastructure is maintained consistent with the cloud service.
So here's a fun fact, right? So this
Yep.
this comes up. So I'll throw this in the chat
Okay.
verbally, if you will. So because it's continually updated, so you just hit on this, and the cloud connectors, if you're unfamiliar with the architecture, are what connect your local landing zone for Citrix, you know, the
Right.
things hosting your VDAs and those sorts of things, they get you connected to the cloud. And so folks want to manage that as well. Like they don't want updates in the middle of the day. And so that is an option, is can I manage the updates to the connectors themselves? And you can schedule that. So if you want to align that with your maintenance window, totally
Right.
doable.
Yeah.
And also going back to the LTSR, so the latest version is 2402. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that it came out in 2404, right? So it wasn't
Yeah.
exactly a February release. They get delayed just a little bit. However, we did release cumulative update 1, I want to say a month-ish ago. So there is an update that for that as well. I know a lot of customers, even with an LTSR, will choose to wait until the first update before they deploy. Probably pretty prudent, you know, just in terms of maintenance, but that was just released as well.
Yep. So this slide here, really, I kind of covered much of it, but I'll touch on a couple of points. Obviously, 5 years of mainstream support for the LTSR. It's a little hard to see with that blue at the top. Sorry about that. And then standard every few months for the CRs. Releases are obtained from the same place. Cumulative updates. This is an important point, I think, because the current releases or the CRs typically come out 2 to 4 times a year. There aren't really any. The cumulative update for a CR is the next CR.
As the next CR,
Yeah.
yeah.
Whereas a cumulative update for your LTSR is actually termed a cumulative update, and it's really only applicable to the LTSR. And again, the cumulative updates that apply to LTSRs are designed for bug fixes. And again, we're talking largely about on-prem deployments here when we're talking about upgrading 2402. There are typically, when you're dealing with the cloud, the cloud service, which I mentioned a minute ago, the cloud service there, you may be required to upgrade your VDAs periodically with the cloud service just to maintain any new features. That's generally considered a best practice, wouldn't you say, Jeremy?
Yeah, I would say so. And, you know, I'd argue that a lot of customers are even aligning, even with the cloud service with continuous updates, are aligning with the LTSR,
LTSR, yeah.
VDA versions as well. Yep.
Yeah. The other takeaway here at the bottom, enhancement requests, no enhancements until the next LTSR, and because of the rapid release cycle of the CRs or the current releases, enhancement requests are typically implemented as soon as possible, and then once they're released, it's typically in the next CR, depending on timing.
Yep. No, you're right. You're right. And honestly, most customers who they've fallen in one of these two different buckets is they know what they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of our customers, except for the really small ones, are LTSR by and large. So, all right, we're going to talk about upgrade considerations. Three items here: compatibility, new features or some new features, and then migration paths. So an important consideration when you're looking to upgrade your LTSR, so perhaps you're going from 1912 to 2402, 2402 being the latest, you've got to consider obviously your operating support. And as you can see here, when you look at 2402, 2012 R2, Windows Server 2012 R2 is no longer a supported OS for 2402, but you can see, and this is VDA support at the top, I'm sorry. VDA, that's the support for the VDA. So if you are running 1912, which, as Jeremy indicated earlier, is going end of life at the end of this year, which is just a few months from now. So if you're running 1912, if you want to continue getting support, you really need to move to either 2203 or 2402. The downside is if you do that, 2012 R2 VDAs, while they still may connect, you know, not sure, but while they still may connect, they would not be supported operating systems in the 2203 or 2402 realm, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, and so I think if you're still running 2012 R2, you know, I think you're probably assuming some risk already in your environment in terms of just
Yes,
operating system support. So
it's
again,
already
it's a
out.
calculated risk.
Yeah.
As you look to upgrade different versions as well. And so, listen, we do have customers, and we saw this quite a bit. Bill's seen this, where they'll keep old farms around simply to support 2008 R2. You remember those days?
Oh
And
yeah.
I still
Oh, yeah.
bump into, I'll argue I haven't seen it in a while, but even 2003. So,
We bumped into 2 weeks ago a 6.5 farm, believe it or not,
oh yeah,
running web
that's,
interface with Citrix Secure Gateway.
I mean, that says a lot about 6.5, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure does. So,
Mhm.
so that's the VDA support. And you'll notice if you look carefully that on 1912, if that's what you're running today, you really don't have support for Windows 11 or 2022 server. So to get that, you've got to move to one of the more current releases. Generally, if you look at these releases, like for example, 2203, since it was released in 22, would be supported till 27. 24 would be supported till 2029, thereabouts. Mainstream support. So you've got some runway there with either one of them. You just got a couple of years more if you go to 2402.
So
As
Bill,
far,
I know, you know what, let's talk about platform support first. I'm gonna get your opinion on migration strategies, which I know we've got a couple of slides on.
We do, yeah. So from a platform support perspective, it's very similar. Obviously, 2012 R2 is no longer supported for hosting things like the delivery controllers or storefront, what have you. They've actually the last two LTSRs haven't had that support, and then to get 2022 support or to support 2022, you need to be on 2203 or 2402, and that 2022 is Windows Server 2022. And then, of course, over on the right, you can see if you've got a Linux environment and you're delivering Linux workloads, those are the supported distros of Linux that apply to the latest LTSR. All right, Jeremy, you had some thoughts.
In terms of migration, right? So, we do have customers on an LTSR today. They're on 1912, maybe they're on 2203.
Right.
When they go to a newer platform, did you find them using the same opportunity? Because we'll talk about whether you do in-place upgrades
Right.
or a parallel upgrade. Do you find your customers using this opportunity to upgrade the OS as well? So they'll do it in parallel. They'll go from maybe 2019 for hosting a lot of those infrastructure, the DDCs. Yeah, they might be looking at a SQL upgrade. They're doing those pieces. But they'll do an upgrade of not just the Citrix piece, but they'll also migrate these things to a newer version of the OS as well.
Absolutely. Yes, that's what we typically find now. That on the infrastructure side, we generally strongly recommend that, obviously. It's interesting what we found lately is customers will say, well, I was on 2012 R2, I want to go to 2019. Well, actually 2019 has reached end of support, unless you buy extended support, as it indicates at the bottom. So we encourage customers to the extent possible for the infrastructure side to go to 2022. What we have found is that a lot of those customers will do that, but they can't move all the workloads, the VDAs, from 2016 or 2019 because of application compatibility. And I suspect we're going to see that even more when 2025 goes GA and folks start wanting to move to that for the infrastructure side. I think the VDAs are always going to lag a little bit behind the infrastructure simply because of the application compatibility issues.
Understood. Okay. That makes sense.
So this is kind of another level of looking at infrastructure components. We kind of already talked about it. You see the various ones there, and these are all check marks. So all of these are supported with 2402 across most of the editions. Obviously, Server 2016, 2019 have already entered the end of support. So to the extent possible, if you're looking to do a migration, you probably want to put your infrastructure on 2022 or higher at this point. SQL, generally, we at XenTegra for a production environment don't recommend using the Express version. We normally recommend standard or enterprise using always on availability groups. You get some different capabilities depending on standard and enterprise. A lot of customers will already have this, so it's not an issue, but that's generally the recommendation. So some of the new enhancements, you saw that micro font that was on the screen a little while ago. I'm going to just hit some highlights here. When you're talking about coming from 2203 to 2402, that's just 2 years difference there. So we've got, I'm going to go pretty quickly on this because we're running out of time. But essentially the workload and device flexibility, the support for Windows 10 and 11 multi-session was there in 2402, and then non-domain joined VMs. Some key
real quick, Bill. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big one, right? So when we talk about that
Yep.
last bullet point, that's essentially AVD. So when folks think of AVD, they're thinking
yes.
about Windows 10 and Windows 11 multi-session, you know, in Azure. You know, that is now supported in the LTSR. Now, LTSR is an on-prem quote. I'm using air quotes here. You know, it is a customer managed control plane. Why does this make sense? Sure, we do have customers who are extending these environments out to Azure, but we do have customers who are running full stack in Azure as well. So we're supporting them. That's probably more often the case.
Yeah, but you can integrate on-prem to Azure if you wanted to for bursting or for So under operational and IT efficiency, we've got Web Studio. So like Jeremy said earlier, the MMC goes away, as well as autoscale for on-premises workloads. This is really key when you start considering power and cooling needs in an expensive data center, and you're paying for every kilowatt of electricity. If you can spin down some of those workloads, leveraging autoscale during times when they're not needed, that can benefit you from a cost perspective. Obviously, I don't really need to say much about how that benefits you in a cloud environment, a public cloud environment. Security and compliance, enhancements to session recording, secure private access and enterprise browsers available on-prem. There's some new WIM capabilities, and then app access controls that are in 2402. In end user experience, from an end user experience perspective, a lot of work's been done here. The AV1 codec and an automatic capability to select the appropriate codec. Of course, a lot of enhancement in Teams optimization, being able to blur, which was something that wasn't available in 2203. I know that from experience, as well as some other significant enhancements to graphics from the build to lossless perspective. All right.
I will say this real quick. So we go to the
sure.
second column. Web Studio is pretty slick. If you haven't seen it, it is a fully webifized version of Studio. It's quicker, it's faster. You know, it's the version that's actually been in the cloud for some time. It's just finally made it on-prem. What really drives that, though, is we have added an API to the product as well that really enables things like the Terraform provider as well. So we have folks looking to automate complete builds of the entire environment, and they're leveraging Terraform to do it. So it's pretty slick to see. It's very cool technology.
For sure. So only a few slides left, folks. So I want to talk briefly about migration paths. We've really broken this down into two, an in-place and a parallel, which I'll talk about the parallel in a second. An in-place upgrade involves just what it implies. You've got a DDC, a delivery controller. I said DDC. You've got a delivery controller running in your data center, and you pop in the ISO or mount the ISO for the 2402 LTSR and do it in an in-place upgrade. A lot of testing. You want to take snapshots for rollback, and this may require a little bit of downtime, not significant. The biggest challenge with this, in my view, and Jeremy, I don't know if you agree or not, is when you do an upgrade like this in place, once you start the console, it's going to do a backend database update. If that fails and you haven't backed up your database, you could be in an uh-oh moment. So that's one of the biggest challenges. You're going to have that you may not have, you wouldn't have that in a parallel migration because you'd have a new database in 90% of the cases. But we generally don't recommend in-place upgrades except for smaller farms. And even then, we'd probably recommend a parallel because of the means of actually transitioning your users from the old environment to the new environment. It's much easier.
And honestly, by default, you're probably doing one of these anyways because you're probably upgrading the OS to a new version as well.
Yes, exactly. So that's where the parallel and migration comes into play. You're building a fully independent parallel environment. Obviously, you need more infrastructure. Doesn't require downtime, and you can do testing as you need to with no impact to the end users, other than directing them perhaps to a different storefront, or even as simple as a different icon within the storefront. And this also provides an opportunity for you to do cleanup of unused settings and policies and things of that nature. We generally recommend a parallel build when we're scoping projects for customers that are looking to go from maybe 2203 or 1912. We're doing a lot of 1912 to 2402 migrations. because like Jeremy said, they're having to upgrade the underlying Windows operating system. A parallel migration is the way to go, because you don't want to try to do an in-place upgrade of an OS anymore, unless you're really brave. Yes, yeah. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is training and enablement. Citrix has the capability of, or has availability for customers of training information in Pluralsight. Jeremy, you want to talk more about that because you know it better than I do.
Oh, yeah. So we have decommissioned training.citrix.com. So if you tried to go out anytime over the last year or so, that has been decommissioned. In lieu of that, we actually have a partnership with Pluralsight that any Citrix customer has access to. You go out to the Pluralsight website, it'll ask you for your work email. So as long as you have an email that's aligned with like your My Citrix account, there's a workflow that will grant you access. So if you want self-paced sorts of trainings, the sorts of things that were out at training.citrix.com before, it's out there. So just make sure you either ask your sales team, you ask Bill, we'll get that in front of you. But Bill also knows of a partnership that XenTegra has with Layer 8 around in-person or potentially virtual-led training, correct?
Yes, this is what we got on the screen here is we have been partners with Layer 8 for a very long time, almost since back to the founding of XenTegra. Layer 8, a company that's won all kinds of awards for doing Citrix training, both NetScaler and the software Citrix CVAT or DAS. And they have training on LTSR as well as DAS. Since if you come to XenTegra, if you want the in-person or virtual instructor-led training, they do a great job with it by very experienced instructors. They do it all via Zoom. They can arrange for an in-person if that's needed, but generally it's done virtually. And we at XenTegra have a special program with them where we can get you a pretty good discount on the training. So if you're interested in that, just reach out to me directly or to your XenTegra salesperson.
Hey, Bill, fun fact, when my team goes to get in-person training, they also go to Layer 8. So we work with that team.
Yep, that's good to know
as well.
Yeah. I mean, I remember going back, I don't know, probably 10 years. I was actually a certified instructor. I taught classes for a VAR through a certified learning center, training center. And there were a lot of them back then. And over time, they've kind of whittled down and moved on to other things. But Layer 8 has stayed true to the Citrix story, and it's still their primary offering. Although you can see they do offer some training in other topics, but Citrix is still the key strength for those guys. So if you're looking for this kind of training and enablement for yourself or your team, feel free to reach out and we can help connect you. Excellent. All right, that's all we had for today, folks. We went over a little bit. Appreciate y'all sticking with us. Are there any questions you want to drop in the chat bar or the chat box or the Q&A? Okay, Matt, I was just going to say how happy we've been with DAS. We've been on it for 2 years. No more SQL database storefronts, DDCs, or NetScalers. 10 out of a 10 plus. I am not a XenTegra plant. No, he's not a XenTegra plant. So I love that. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. Glad to hear. All right, folks. Thanks so much for joining us today. Again, reach out if you need anything from XenTegra or Citrix. You can reach out to myself or Jeremy or your salesperson. Have a great day. Thank you.
Excellent. Hey, guys. Thanks, guys.